What would you do if a stranger leaned on your shoulder at the airport, then quietly changed the course of your life without ever asking your name? The airport smelled like old coffee and winter rain. Outside the window, sleet slid sideways across the tarmac, driven by a wind that carried both holiday rush and quiet heartbreak. Inside, it was all noise, PA systems crackling overhead, suitcase wheels rattling on tile, voices overlapping in too many directions. And yet, in a corner seat near gate 14B, Ben Turner sat still. His coat was frayed at the cuffs, the color faded from too many winters. His face, lined and quiet, told a story he didn't often speak aloud. Beside him, curled in a pink puffer jacket, was his daughter, Maddie. 5 years old and always humming to herself when nervous. She clutched a stuffed fox in her arms, arranged threadbare, with mismatched button eyes and ears sewn back on with clumsy stitches. The kind of toy that had been loved so fiercely, it looked like it had survived a war. Maddie looked up at him with wide eyes, the kind that still believed the world might give back everything it had taken. "Is Mommy going to be there?" Ben felt that familiar crack inside his chest. He gave her a smile, small and soft around the corners. "No, baby. Just Grandpa this time." She nodded, like she understood, but she didn't. Not really. She just knew that Mommy hadn't been there for a while now, and that whenever she asked, Daddy's voice got quieter. A boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. "Another delay? Snowstorms in Denver. Figures." Ben sighed and reached into his backpack for a crumpled sandwich. He broke it in half and handed the bigger piece to Maddie. She offered it back. He refused. She smiled, victorious. Then she sneezed hard. Twice. He chuckled and reached again into his bag for tissues, and that's when he noticed her. A few rows down sat a woman, maybe early 30s, younger than Ben, but carrying that look of someone far older in the eyes. Her coat was elegant but wrinkled, like she'd slept in it. Draped across her chest in a soft grey sling was a sleeping baby, head nestled against her heartbeat. The baby was still, but the woman wasn't. Her shoulders rocked gently side to side, fighting sleep, or maybe something deeper. Her lips were slightly parted, her eyelids fluttered. She looked like she was losing to exhaustion, gracefully, quietly. Their eyes met. Just a second. Then hers dropped. Ben saw the seats beside him were empty, 2 of them. She moved, slowly, and sat down, not right next to him, but close. Close enough for warmth, far enough for dignity. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Some people just needed silence to survive the day. Still, he watched her from the corner of his eye. She wasn't beautiful in the polished magazine kind of way. She was beautiful like dusk, quiet, soft, almost gone before you realized you were watching something sacred. Her lips were pale. Her fingers clutched the sling strap like she was holding herself together by it. The baby stirred and let out a soft noise. The woman whispered something soothing in a language he couldn't make out. Ben remembered that stage. The bone-deep fatigue. The nights where you were needed and invisible in the same breath. He unzipped his bag again and paused. Then he pulled out a sealed juice box and a pack of animal crackers. Maddie looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "She looks tired," he whispered. Maddie stood, marched up to the woman, and held out the juice box like a tiny offering. The woman blinked, startled. Then she smiled. A real smile. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was warm velvet, frayed at the edges. Maddie pointed at the baby. "She's littler than me." "Yes," the woman said, "just a few months." "I like your baby," Maddie replied, then skipped back to Ben's side. The woman's shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in surrender. A quiet acceptance of kindness. Ben glanced over. "First flight?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, just the hard one." He nodded. He knew that flight. Minutes passed. The baby stirred again, fussing. The woman shifted, tried to comfort her. Her eyelids were heavy now. Ben turned his head slightly. You can lean here if you need. He tapped his shoulder gently. The woman hesitated. Her lips parted like she might say no, but her eyes said yes. I'm fine, she whispered. The baby cried. A short, sharp wail. Ben didn't press. But he didn't move either. He just sat still, a quiet invitation. She closed her eyes. And then slowly, carefully, she let herself lean. Her head landed on his shoulder. The baby stopped crying. Breath settled. Heartbeats found rhythm. The hum of the terminal faded. Ben froze, barely breathing. He hadn't been this close to anyone in years. Her hair smelled faintly of chamomile and something sterile. Airport soap, maybe. Her breathing was slow, trembling. Maddie curled beside him, her head resting on his lap, the fox in her arms like a guardian. Outside, snow smeared across the windows like forgotten wishes, and in the corner of Gate 14B, time melted. Planes came and went. Announcements blurred into static. People rushed, but they didn't. They stayed. Still. Just three strangers, tangled by chance, by fatigue, by kindness. And somehow, without a single word more, they already felt like something more than that. The rhythm of breath was steady now. Claire Westwood slept with her head gently resting on Ben Turner's shoulder, her infant daughter Sophie bundled tight against her chest. Ben sat motionless, like one shift might break the spell. He wasn't used to this kind of stillness, not the quiet of solitude, but the quiet of being needed, of being trusted. Maddie had dozed off, one small hand tucked under her cheek, the other resting on the stuffed fox. Her breathing matched Sophie's, slow, soft, almost melodic. A flight attendant walked by, paused and smiled. Sweet family, she whispered. Ben almost corrected her. But the words didn't come, because for this one suspended moment, it felt true. He didn't know Claire's name. She didn't know his. But somehow, they shared something heavier than introductions. They shared survival. Claire stirred as her phone vibrated. She blinked, slowly lifted her head from his shoulder, disoriented. I'm sorry, she murmured, adjusting Sophie, brushing stray strands of hair behind her ear. Ben shook his head. No need. His shoulder felt colder now. She answered the call in a language Ben didn't recognize. Elegant, clipped like a string of pearls unspooling fast. When she hung up, she turned back to him. Your daughter's lovely, she said. So's yours. Claire looked down at Sophie, eyes shimmering with something unspoken. I didn't expect to be doing this alone. Ben nodded, turning toward the window. Me either. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was shared. A kind of peace settled over them, thin but real. Then Maddie sat up, rubbing her eyes. Is it time to go? Almost, Ben replied. Claire gently stood, rocking Sophie as she did. The baby didn't wake. She reached into her bag and pulled out something small wrapped in white tissue paper. She handed it to Maddie. For the fox, she said. He looks brave. Maddie unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a tiny gold button, almost identical to the one missing from her stuffed animal's eye. Maddie beamed. Claire smiled. Thank you, Maddie said. Claire looked at Ben, then really looked. Thank you for letting me rest, for not asking questions. He smiled, just barely. Any time. They boarded not long after. Coincidence or something more placed them in the same row. Claire by the window. Ben in the middle. Maddie at the aisle, her fox now proudly wearing two mismatched gold buttons. The flight was quiet. The kind of quiet only snow and exhaustion can create. Halfway through, turbulence hit. Maddie whimpered. Ben reached for her hand. Claire instinctively extended hers too, resting it gently on Maddie's shoulder. No words, just warmth. When they landed, Claire lingered at the edge of the crowd. Her driver was late. Or maybe she was just stalling. Ben passed her near baggage claim. She turned. "My name is Claire," she said. "Claire Westwood. If you ever need anything, just remember that." He nodded. "I'm Ben." No handshake. No hug, just recognition, and something sacred left unfinished. They walked their separate ways. Ben zipped Maddie's coat, slung her backpack over his shoulder, and carried the fox under one arm. She looked up at him. "Daddy, will we see her again?" He paused. "Maybe," he said, "if we're lucky." When they reached the car, Ben found something in his pocket. Thin, delicate, a slip of paper. It was a boarding pass, first class, no name. Just initials. CW. No note. Just the gesture. He looked up at the grey sky. Snow was falling again, quiet, drifting like forgiveness. Sometimes the world gives you nothing but delays and lost luggage. And sometimes it gives you a place to rest your head, even if just for a flight. The hum of the plane had become a lullaby, a sanctuary above the clouds, and even though Claire and Ben had parted without promises, something in the air had changed. Something warm, something unfinished, something that just maybe wasn't over yet. The coffee shop was quiet, tucked between a florist and a dry cleaner on a sleepy street corner. Ben Turner sat by the window, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The warmth from the coffee seeped into his fingers, but not quite deep enough to shake the chill in his chest. Across from him, Maddie swung her legs beneath the table. She was humming again that little tune she never quite remembered the words to, but always tried anyway. Her fox sat in her lap, now proudly sporting 2 gold buttons for eyes. It had been 6 days since the flight. 6 days since Claire Westwood and her baby had disappeared into the back of a black car. Ben hadn't expected to think about her this much. But he did. Not just her face, or the way her voice sounded like worn velvet. It was the stillness she carried. The weight behind her silence, and how, for one brief window in time, he hadn't felt alone. He reached into his coat pocket and found it again. The boarding pass, first class, no name. Just 2 initials, CW. He still didn't know what to do with it. "Daddy," Maddie said, sipping her chocolate milk, "when are we flying again?" Ben smiled faintly. "Not for a while, bug." She leaned in closer. I liked her. Me too. Before he could say more, the bell above the cafe door jingled. A delivery man stepped in, arms full. He spoke with the barista, then pointed toward Ben. "Got something here for a Ben Turner." Ben blinked. "I didn't order anything." The barista shrugged. "It's addressed to you." The man placed 2 packages on the table, one large padded envelope sealed in heavy paper, and a small box, square, tied with twine. No return address, just his name. Handwritten. Maddie's eyes were wide now. "Is it from her?" Ben didn't answer right away. His fingers trembled slightly as he undid the knot and lifted the lid. Inside the box, nestled in folds of linen, was a wooden spoon. Simple. Smooth, slightly worn. Along the handle were initials, carved deep and faded with time. CW. He stared at it for a long time. Beneath the spoon lay a folded letter, cream-colored paper. The kind no one used anymore unless it mattered. He opened it slowly. "Ben, I don't know if you'll read this right away, or if you'll remember me at all. But I wanted to say thank you for the quiet shoulder you offered when I didn't know I needed one, for juice boxes, for letting your daughter draw my baby into her world like it was the most natural thing. You said something to me on that plane that hasn't left me. Kids remember absence. You were right. But I also believe they remember kindness even more. I've spent so long building a life that moves too fast. I didn't tell you who I was or what I do. I didn't want the shift in your eyes. So here's the truth. My name is Claire Westwood. My daughter's name is Sophie. And yes, I own the airline we were flying. But I'm writing to you not as an executive, not as someone with offices or titles, but as a mother. As a woman who has known deep loss and deeper love. As someone who forgot what softness felt like until she sat beside a stranger who didn't try to fix her. I'm sending you this spoon because you held its story with reverence. Because I saw how you look at your daughter. Because you reminded me what home might feel like. There's also a ticket in the envelope. It has no date, no expiration. It's yours. If ever you feel like flying again, there's a seat waiting for you. But more than that, I hope this finds you in peace. And if not, I hope it brings a little bit of it with it. Claire. Ben let the letter rest in his lap. The noise of the cafe faded. He didn't hear the milk steamer hiss. He didn't hear the chairs scrape across the floor. He just stared out the window, snow beginning to fall again. Maddie tugged his sleeve. What's it say? He looked at her, this tiny human who had saved him from disappearing into himself. He folded the letter and tucked it carefully back into the envelope. It says, "We mattered." She tilted her head, like she'd heard something important. Yeah, she said, exactly like that. Ben reached for the boarding pass now, held it between his fingers like a question. Like a door left cracked open. He didn't know where it would lead, or if he'd ever walk through it. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man running out of road. He felt invited, and that, he thought, was more than he'd hoped for. Ben didn't call right away. The ticket sat in the drawer next to the coffee filters. The letter, folded neatly, lived inside an old book he kept on his nightstand, one he never finished but couldn't throw away. Every morning, he passed both. Every night, he almost reached for the phone, but life kept stepping in. Lunches had to be packed, shoes tied, bills paid. Grief managed in small, quiet doses. He told himself it wasn't the right time, that maybe she hadn't meant it. That maybe it was a kind gesture, not an actual invitation. And yet, every time Maddie drew a picture that included a baby girl in a sling, or when she offered a juice box to a friend at school and said, "It makes you brave," he thought of Claire. It was Maddie who broke the rhythm one quiet Saturday morning. She was at the table surrounded by crayons when she looked up and said, "Daddy, can we visit her?" Ben blinked. Visit who? The lady with the baby, she said, like it should have been obvious. She said we could come. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. You always say we should listen to quiet things, she added softly. That stopped him, because he did say that. And she had been listening. That afternoon, while Maddie napped, Ben opened the drawer. He took out the envelope, the boarding pass still tucked inside. He turned it over. In tiny letters on the back was a phone number. He stared at it for a long time. Then dialed. It rang once, twice. Then a soft voice answered. Avery Aviation, this is Jenna. He cleared his throat. Hi. I think I was told to call this number. A pause. May I ask who's calling? He hesitated then. Ben Turner. She'll know. Another pause. But this one was different. A soft inhale, as if something gentle had just landed. Yes, Jenna said, almost a whisper. She will. They didn't talk long, just enough to confirm a date, a flight, an address. Jenna didn't ask questions. She didn't explain anything. She simply said, "We'll be ready when you are." 3 days later, Ben and Maddie boarded the plane. First class. But that wasn't what felt different. It was the way the air felt warm instead of sterile. The way the flight attendants smiled knowingly, like they were in on a secret but respectful enough not to say it out loud. One of them knelt beside Maddie halfway through the flight and handed her a small card. Maddie looked at it, her face glowing. She turned it over and showed her dad. It was a drawing. 4 stick figures holding hands beneath the sun. One of them wore a fox hat. Another had a baby on her chest. Ben's breath caught. "Where did you get this?" "She told me to give it to you," the attendant said softly, "when I saw your daughter's fox." Ben turned the card over again. On the back, in looping handwriting, were 4 words: "Found families, find each other." When they landed, the sky was pink with late afternoon light. A coastal city framed by soft blue mountains welcomed them with a breeze that smelled of salt and pine. A driver was waiting. Same car, or at least it looked that way. Maddie held the drawing tightly as they rode in silence, her head against Ben's arm. When the car turned onto a winding road lined with trees and wildflowers, something inside Ben shifted. He didn't know what he'd expected, some grand estate maybe, gates or glass walls. But what came into view instead was a quiet home, tucked into the hills like it had grown there. Wide windows, a porch swing, wind chimes, and then Claire. She stepped outside barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, Sophie resting on her hip. She smiled. Soft, unhurried, like she'd been waiting without keeping time. "Hi," she said, her voice even quieter than he remembered. Before Ben could reply, Maddie was already running forward. Claire knelt as Maddie reached her, and they embraced like something unspoken had finally come full circle. Ben just stood there, watching. "You didn't have to invite us," he said. Claire looked at him, steady. "I didn't," she said. "I wanted to." They stood in the doorway for a moment, not moving, not needing to. Inside, the house smelled of fresh bread and lavender. The fire crackled in the hearth. Toys were scattered across the rug, not in mess, but in life. No pretense, no performance. Just a home. Ben took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while it didn't feel like something was missing. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep on a mountain of pillows and picture books, Ben found something left on the table. A small envelope. Unsealed. Inside was a napkin, the same kind Claire used once before. On it, written in simple handwriting, "Redemption isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just being seen and not turning away." Ben folded it slowly, pressed it to his chest. Then he looked around at the quiet room, the blanket Claire had left for him. The soft snoring of a child who wasn't his, but had still found comfort in his lap. The spoon resting gently on a shelf above the fireplace. And he thought, maybe coming here wasn't the end of something. Maybe. It was finally the beginning. The morning mist curled over the hills like breath held too long. Light crept slowly across the sky, delicate and golden, brushing the windows of a house that wasn't grand, but felt like it had been waiting for them. Inside, an old record spun on a turntable. Piano music floated through the kitchen, soft and laced with just enough static to feel like memory. Claire stood barefoot at the stove, stirring oatmeal with one hand. Sophie balanced on her hip, murmuring sleepy syllables into the collar of her mother's sweater. Ben sat at the table. His coffee was still steaming. His shirt smelled faintly of lavender soap, something he'd found tucked in a basket in the guest bathroom the night before. Down the hallway, Maddie's laughter echoed. He couldn't remember the last time her voice had sounded that light. Claire caught him watching and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't ask for anything in return. It had been 3 weeks. 3 slow, sacred weeks of settling. Not into someone else's life, but into a rhythm neither of them had expected to want. A rhythm made of unspoken things. Of mugs set side by side each morning, of quiet nods, of blankets folded and placed on the couch without being asked. They hadn't defined anything, no declarations, no labels. But they'd learned each other's silences. Claire no longer flinched at small noises. Ben no longer kept his boots by the door like he might need to leave quickly. And the girls. The girls had bonded in the way children do when adults get out of the way. Maddie had taken to calling Sophie Bean. No one knew why. No one corrected her. Every evening, like clockwork, the two girls would curl up on the rug in front of the fire. Sophie with her bottle, Maddie with a picture book. They never made it to the last page. There was a ritual now. Claire would place a blanket over them both. Ben would return the wooden spoon to the shelf, like setting a prayer back on the altar. And before heading to bed, he would open the tea drawer, fold the napkin again and place it underneath like a quiet reminder that healing doesn't have to be loud. They didn't talk much about what came next. Maybe they didn't need to. One morning, as they walked down a moss-covered trail behind the house, Ben stopped. A crooked mailbox leaned at the edge of the woods, half buried in ivy, its red flag rusted and still. "Eleanor," he said, then caught himself. "Claire." She turned. Her scarf fluttered behind her like a bird's wing. He pointed to the mailbox. "I think it gave up." Claire laughed softly. "It's been years." "I always meant to fix it." Ben crouched, brushed the ivy aside, and gently opened the door. Inside, a single envelope, yellowed, unstamped, just a name in faded ink. "To the next version of me." Claire took it carefully. "I forgot I ever wrote this." She turned it over in her hands, then looked up at him. "Would you read it?" Ben hesitated. "You sure?" She nodded. He unfolded the paper and read slowly, his voice steady, like the hush that falls right before snow. "To the next version of me. If you're reading this, it means you're still here. It means you made it through something, maybe not with grace, but with breath. I hope you've stopped apologizing for needing rest. I hope you've let go of the lie that you have to earn gentleness. I hope you found someone who sees you, even in your silence. And if you haven't yet, remember, it only takes one moment to begin again. Even if that beginning looks like an open door, a warm shoulder, or a child who calls you Bean. Love, the you who didn't yet believe in second chances." Ben folded the letter and handed it back to her like it was made of glass. Claire didn't speak. She simply pressed it to her chest. Then very softly she asked, "Would you help me fix the mailbox?" Ben smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that." That afternoon they worked together. Maddie passed nails one by one, like she was delivering treasure. Sophie slept in the sling on Claire's chest. Her tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her mother's sweater. They replaced the flag, brushed off the rust, straightened the post. When it was done, it gleamed like something small but worthy. Ben slipped a note inside. Just a few words, nothing big. "This feels like home." He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. That night, as the fire flickered low and the girls lay tangled in a nest of blankets and stuffed animals, Maddie asked a question. "Are we staying?" Ben looked at Claire, and for the first time, she didn't look away. He knelt beside Maddie, brushing a curl from her forehead. "We're not leaving yet," he said. "That's what matters." Maddie nodded, satisfied. Beside her, Sophie Bean stretched and, half asleep, reached out. Her tiny hand wrapped around Ben's thumb. It was the first time she'd done that. No one spoke. The moment didn't need words. In the dark, Claire reached over and gently covered all three of them with the same blanket. And outside the window, stars began to rise. Soft, steady, like hope, learning to breathe again. In the days that followed, the rhythm deepened, not rushed, not forced. Just found. They planted wildflowers along the porch, their fingers caked with dirt, their laughter echoing down the slope. Claire showed Maddie how to fold paper cranes, slow, careful creases turning into wings. Ben fixed a squeaky door hinge, even though no one asked him to. He said it gave him something to offer. There were no labels, no declarations, but they moved through the house like people who belonged to the same quiet like notes in a song they hadn't written, but somehow knew by heart. They didn't fall in love the way movies told you to. They grew toward each other, like trees. Slow, unhurried, rooted deeper every day. And then came spring. It was a Sunday morning when the letter arrived, not from far away. Not through some courier or special delivery. It came from the old mailbox, the one they had repaired together. Claire found it first. She was barefoot again, cradling a cup of tea. The air smelled like new grass and cedar. The flag on the mailbox was raised. A single envelope sat inside, unmarked. Just one line across the front. To all of us. She brought it inside, and they sat on the porch to open it. Claire, Ben, Maddie on his lap, Sophie Bean in hers. The air was just warm enough for bare arms. Claire unfolded the letter. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Inside was a drawing, 4 stick figures. One had messy curls. One held a baby, one had a fox in its arms, one stood just a little taller than the rest. Above them, a yellow sun with long crayon beams. Stars dotted the sky, even though it was daytime. And below it, in careful, uneven handwriting, "We are not broken things. We are becoming." No one said anything for a while. Maddie rested her head on Ben's chest. Sophie clutched one of Claire's fingers and didn't let go. Claire folded the letter again, set it on the table. Ben looked over at her, and for the first time, he saw no sadness behind her eyes, only softness, and something that looked a lot like peace. They spent that afternoon quietly. Maddie and Claire baked cookies shaped like flowers. Sophie napped in the sling while Ben read by the window, one eye always watching the 3 of them. At dinner, no one reached for their phones. There were no questions about tomorrow, just full plates, shared glances, and the comfort of being where you were supposed to be. That night, Claire found the drawing framed on the wall near the fireplace. Ben had done it while she was putting the girls to sleep. She didn't say anything, just smiled. She walked to him, slipped her hand into his. No words. Some things speak loudest in silence. Before bed, Ben opened the tea drawer. The napkin was still there. Folded, worn. He unfolded it slowly, like a ritual. Read it one more time. Redemption isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just being seen, and not turning away. He placed it back. Turned off the kitchen light, and just before the house fell completely still, he paused by the front window, watched the trees move in the breeze, watched the stars blink to life, watched as a world he didn't know he was allowed to hope for kept growing around him. Not perfect, but real. A place stitched together by tiny offerings, a fox with button eyes, a spoon with carved initials, a napkin folded like prayer, a mailbox that worked again, and 2 little girls who made everything feel possible. This wasn't the life Ben had planned, but maybe, just maybe, it was the life that had waited for him. It was a Thursday morning, the kind of morning that arrived slowly light, sneaking through the curtains like it didn't want to intrude. Claire was sorting through a basket in the hallway closet, looking for a spare light bulb, or maybe just something to keep her hands busy. Sophie was napping. Maddie was on the porch, drawing suns with long yellow rays. Ben was fixing a chair that didn't need fixing. Claire reached deep into the back of the closet and pulled out a dusty old tin boxone she hadn't seen in years. The lid creaked open, revealing a bundle of faded receipts, dried-out pens, a cracked lip balm, and a handful of old letters tied with string. She untied the bundle slowly, careful not to tear the yellowed edges. One letter in particular caught her eye. The envelope was unsealed. On the front, written in her own handwriting, "To the version of me that might still need this." Her breath caught. She didn't remember writing it, but something inside her knew what it was. She found Ben in the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Would you read this with me?" she asked. He looked at her, then at the letter, and nodded. They stepped out onto the back porch. The trees rustled like whispers. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine and lavender. Claire sat down, folded her legs beneath her, and passed him the letter. Ben unfolded it slowly, like opening a door that had stayed closed too long. His voice was gentle, measured. "To the version of me that might still need this, if you're holding this, you're still trying. You're still breathing. You made it through something that tried to end you. I hope you've forgiven yourself for needing help. I hope you've stopped hiding your softness. I hope you're letting someone see you, not the version you polish for strangers, but the one that cries in parking lots and sings to sleeping babies. I hope you've stopped apologizing for being the one who holds everything together. And if you haven't, that's okay. There's time. There's always time to begin again. Even if that beginning looks like a tired man on a bench, or a child who offers juice as courage, or a shoulder that doesn't flinch when you lean. If you've found them, I hope you let them stay. And if you haven't yet, I hope you believe you still can. With love, the you who forgot she was still becoming." Ben folded the letter slowly, his fingers brushing the crease with care. He looked at Claire. She was staring out at the trees, eyes glassy, but not broken. "That's beautiful," he said softly. Claire nodded. "I think I wrote it after Sophie was born." Before everything fell apart, she turned to him. "I didn't think I'd ever be the version of me who got to read it." Ben didn't say anything. He just reached for her hand, held it quietly, no pressure, no promises. Just presence. They sat like that for a long while, saying nothing, letting the words settle, letting the silence breathe. Later that day, Claire framed the letter and placed it on the hallway table beside the drawing Maddie had made. 4 figures under a yellow sun. Stick arms, smiling faces. Next to it, she set a small note of her own. It read, "Begin again, as many times as you need." That evening, Ben found Maddie in the kitchen, holding the wooden spoon. She was running her fingers over the carved initials. "Did you ever meet her dad?" she asked. Ben shook his head. "No, but I think I know him a little." "How?" Ben smiled. "Because of the way she remembers him." Maddie nodded like she understood, then looked up. "Do you think we're staying?" Ben knelt beside her. He looked at the spoon, at the photo on the fridge of Maddie and Claire laughing with flour on their faces, at the soft glow coming from the living room where Claire and Sophie were curled up together. "I think we already are," he said. Maddie grinned. "Good, because Bean likes it here." He laughed. "Yeah, me too." That night, just before bed, Claire slipped a note into the mailbox. No envelope. Just folded paper, scrawled handwriting. It said, "Thank you, past me, for still believing something soft could survive." When she closed the mailbox, the flag stood tall, red, unrusted, like something that had come back to life. Inside, the house was dim and warm. The fire crackled, books rested open on couches, mugs waited to be washed. Children slept like they belonged to this world, and 2 grown people sat side by side, not needing to speak to feel understood. Not broken. Just becoming. They didn't talk about love, not out loud. Not yet. There were no grand confessions, no sudden kisses in the rain. Just time, and rhythm, and the way she passed him the butter every morning without needing to ask. The way he brought her tea just how she liked it, strong, with a drop of honey, and nothing more. They moved through the house like people who knew the dance, even if they didn't know the name of the song. One day, Ben started fixing a loose board on the back steps. Not because anyone told him to, but because he didn't like seeing Claire trip in the mornings. She noticed Didn't say anything, but later he found an extra cup of coffee waiting for him, already cooled to just the right temperature. That was how it went. An exchange of quiet recognitions. On the days Maddie got overwhelmed when she couldn't quite explain her feelings, when her drawings grew frantic and her words tangled, Claire would sit beside her, wordless, and start coloring next to her, side by side. No pressure, no fixing. And when Claire's hands shook at night while washing bottles, Ben would dry them for her. No questions, just steady hands, just presence. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't poetic, but it was real. One Friday afternoon, Maddie ran into the living room carrying a crumpled paper crown. "I made it for Bean," she announced. Claire laughed, kneeling beside her. "It's perfect." Sophie squealed with delight, crown sliding off her head and landing sideways on her ear. She clapped, proud and unaware. Ben watched from the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft. Later that night, as the girls fell asleep in a tangle of blankets and crayons, Claire found Ben out on the porch. He was staring up at the stars. She sat beside him. Didn't say anything. After a while, he said, "You ever think about what this would have looked like if we met 10 years ago?" She smiled, but didn't look away from the sky. "I wouldn't have known what to do with someone like you 10 years ago." Ben chuckled. "Yeah, me neither." They sat in that truth. Let it breathe. "You're not easy," she added, nudging his arm with hers. "But you're good." He looked at her then, really looked. "You're not easy either," he said, "but you're worth it." She turned to him, soft, open, and they didn't kiss, not yet. But they didn't need to. Because sometimes the most honest things don't come from mouths. They come from staying through hard mornings and slow evenings, through tantrums and sore backs and soup that boiled over, through giggles in the bath and late-night laundry. That was what they were doing. Staying. One morning, Ben opened the fridge to find a small container labeled, "For you." Inside, leftover lasagna. His favorite. He hadn't told anyone that. Another day, Claire opened a drawer and found a folded napkin with a note in Maddie's scrawl. "You make Mommy smiles." She hadn't been called Mommy in years. Not by name, but it didn't feel wrong, not anymore. One weekend, they all drove to the farmer's market together. Claire wore a straw hat. Sophie wore socks that didn't match. Maddie brought her fox in a sling. "Just like Bean," she said proudly. Ben carried the bags. And a pie they didn't need but all secretly wanted. When they got home, the sun was setting in streaks of lavender and gold. Claire lit candles in the windows. Maddie played a record she didn't understand but liked the sound of. Sophie danced in her wobbly, wide-legged way, and Ben stood in the doorway again, looking in, the smell of warm bread, the sound of quiet joy, the shape of something that used to be called family, but now it had no name. It just was. Later, after the girls were asleep and the house had settled into stillness, Ben sat down at the table. Claire joined him. Neither of them said a word. She reached over, took his hand. It was the first time. Palm to palm. No space between. They didn't speak, didn't need to, because sometimes love doesn't need an announcement. Sometimes it arrives like a second mug of coffee, like a repaired stare, like a fox with a new button eye, like a spoon passed down and still warm from the past. Sometimes love isn't something you fall into. It's something you grow toward. Together. And that night, sitting in the glow of soft lamps and lullabies, Ben finally allowed himself to think the thought he'd been carrying quietly for weeks. This is my home. It started with a simple question. They were sitting on the floor of the sunroom, sorting through a basket of mismatched puzzle pieces Maddie had insisted were all meant to be. Sophie slept nearby in her swing, lulled by the gentle tick of the ceiling fan and the scent of lemon balm drifting in through the screen door. Claire had gone out for groceries, just a quick run, she said, but the house already felt different without her in it. Ben turned a corner piece in his hand. Maddie picked up a piece shaped like a cloud and squinted at it. "Daddy." "Yeah, bug." She didn't look up. "Are we going to stay here forever?" Ben froze. The piece in his fingers suddenly heavier than it should have been. Maddie still didn't meet his eyes. She just kept turning the puzzle piece slowly, like she was trying to make the question casual. Like she hadn't just cracked open something deep in him. He swallowed. "What do you think?" She finally looked up. Her eyes were steady, too old for her age. "I think Bean wants us to," Ben chuckled, but it came out tight. "She tell you that?" Maddie nodded solemnly. "She grabs your hand when you look sad." Ben glanced at Sophie. Tiny, peaceful, one arm flung over her head like she owned the air. Maddie leaned against his shoulder. "I like it here," she said softly. He exhaled. So did he. That night, Claire returned just as the girls were finishing dinner. She carried a paper bag full of apples and a bouquet of wild daisies Maddie had once pointed to in a storybook. She set them on the counter like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was. They all washed dishes together. Sophie babbled in her high chair. Maddie dried the forks with dramatic flair. Claire hummed an old tune, and Ben just watched her hands move, memorizing the way she made ordinary things sacred. Later, after the girls had gone to bed and the house was cloaked in quiet, Claire sat beside him on the porch, the same place they always found themselves when words were too much and silence said more. She handed him a cup of tea. He took it, held it, but didn't drink. She noticed. Of course she did. "What is it?" she asked gently. Ben hesitated, then, "Maddie asked me if we were staying forever." Claire didn't speak. Didn't flinch, he continued. "She said Bean wants us to." A smile flickered across her lips. "She's not wrong." Ben looked out into the trees. The sky was almost black now, the moon just a sliver. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," he said. "Not like this, not with someone." Claire set her tea down, turned to face him fully. "You are safe here," he nodded. "I know, that's what scares me." Her brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because I didn't plan for this, and now I don't want to leave. But what if we're just borrowing peace that doesn't belong to us?" Claire reached out and took his hand. Held it firmly. "Ben, peace doesn't work like that. It's not a loan. It's something we choose to stand in, or walk away from." He looked at her, eyes searching. "And you'd want us to stay?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." He felt it then. That familiar tightness in his chest that always came before a big decision. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was the overwhelming ache of being allowed to want something again. Claire squeezed his hand. "I'm not asking for answers. I'm not asking for a promise." Ben leaned closer. "But what if I want to give you one?" Her eyes met his. Still open, hopeful, and this time they did kiss. Not urgent, not rushed, just real. Like something that had waited patiently for permission. When they pulled apart, neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. Inside, the house breathed around them. A dish settled in the sink. A baby sighed in her sleep. A child's drawing fluttered gently on the fridge from the breeze through the window. Ben stood and offered Claire his hand. She took it. Steady as ever. That night before bed, he tucked Maddie in. She blinked up at him sleepily. "Did you ask her?" He smiled. "I didn't have to." Maddie nodded, satisfied. "Good." "Because I already unpacked all my socks." Ben chuckled. Of course she had. He kissed her forehead, turned out the light. And as he walked back down the hallway, he passed the napkin tucked into the drawer. He didn't need to read it again. He already knew what it said. Redemption isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just being seen and not turning away. Spring arrived with a quiet kind of certainty. The porch was no longer just a place to sit. It was a daily ritual. Claire would bring out coffee in the mornings, still in her slippers. Ben would be waiting with a newspaper he barely read. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. They had settled into something, not routine, not habit, but rhythm. One morning, Claire walked out holding a letter, unsealed, folded, resting between her fingers like something sacred. Ben raised an eyebrow. She smiled. It was in the mailbox. He set down his mug, took the letter, opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing. 4 figures. 2 tall, 2 small, one with a fox. One with a baby, all holding hands. Above them, a sun. Behind them, a small house with a crooked chimney. And beneath it, in careful crayon lettering, "We are not broken things. We are becoming." Ben swallowed. His eyes stung, but he didn't look away. Claire leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think Maddie put it there. She's been checking the mailbox every day like it's a secret delivery service." Ben chuckled. "Maybe it is." They taped the drawing to the fridge next to the others. The paper crinkled where little hands had pressed it too hard. Later that day, they took the girls down to the lake. Maddie collected smooth stones. Sophie kicked at the water and squealed. Ben skipped rocks badly. Claire laughed every time one sank without a bounce. On the way home, Maddie asked if they could build a tree house. Ben said maybe. Claire said absolutely. And by evening, Maddie had drawn blueprints on the back of a grocery receipt. It had 4 rooms, one for each of them, and a tiny staircase, just for Bean. That night, after the girls were asleep, Claire handed Ben a napkin. He smiled. "Another one?" She nodded. He unfolded it. This one read, "Sometimes family is the place you build with what's left." Ben held it for a moment, then reached into the drawer and placed it beside the first one, not replacing it, just completing it. Later, Claire climbed into bed beside him. He reached for her hand. "Have you ever thought about making it official?" She turned toward him. Soft eyes, steady heart. "Which part?" "All of it." She smiled, ran her thumb along his knuckles. "I used to think official meant paperwork and rings." He waited. "But now I think it means brushing someone's daughter's hair in the morning, learning to like cold coffee because you keep getting distracted by a baby smile, folding laundry while your partner reads bedtime stories off-key." Ben laughed quietly. "I thought I was nailing those songs." "You're not," she teased. "But they love it." He nodded. "So, this is it then?" She looked around the quiet room. At the sound machine humming softly, at the baby monitor blinking warm green, at the photo Maddie had taped to the wall 4 stick figures and the word us. "This," Claire said, "is everything." They didn't talk about weddings or big announcements. There was no need. They had already made their promises. Every day. In dishes washed. In lullabies sung. In steps taken and not taken. 1 week later, they hosted a picnic in the backyard. Just the 4 of them. Peanut butter sandwiches, sliced apples, too many juice boxes. Maddie wore a paper crown. Sophie wore nothing but overalls and joy. Claire brought out the old wooden spoon, set it in the middle of the blanket like a centerpiece. Ben brought out the fox restuffed and stitched again by Claire's careful hands. They took a photo. Set the camera on a timer. No posing, just laughter. Just presence. Later, they printed that photo and taped it on the wall above the kitchen table, right next to a note. Written in Maddie's uneven handwriting, "Home is where we all keep coming back to." If this story found you when you needed it most, if it reminded you that love can be quiet, that families can be built from second chances, that becoming doesn't require perfection, then let someone know. Share it. live it. Be it. Because sometimes the softest stories are the ones we remember longest. Sometimes starting over doesn't look like a fresh beginning. It looks like showing up quietly for someone else. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always come through grand gestures sometimes. It comes through a juice box offered by a child, a quiet porch conversation, or someone letting you rest your head when the world feels too heavy. Family isn't always defined by blood, but by presence, by the people who stay when it's easier to walk away. At any age, we are still becoming, still learning that gentleness is not weakness and silence can be sacred. It's never too late to begin again. Even if that beginning is quiet, even if it comes from broken places. Because what truly matters isn't perfection, but the courage to show up with what's left and to choose each other every single day.